So a big welcome back to Paul from Amazilia Photography. Welcome, Paul. Long time no speak.
No, it's very nice to be back. Thank you.
I absolutely loved the first interview that we did where we were talking about nudes in nature. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, you haven't had a chance to pre-watch the other session yet, then you'll be able to re-watch that. But we will be talking questions as if we don't know who Paul is as well, kind of thing with it. Okay, so you won't need to go and watch the other one first. Paul, we got 8 images, different. They're the dynamic fine art nudes.
Yes. Yeah, I thought having done the nudes in nature last time, it would be appropriate to really change the subject and do something rather different. And I also love shooting dynamic fine art nudes. In fact, I really shot a lot of this before I really sort of got to venture outside. And it's hard for me to get back inside now. I'm so drawn to outside. But I mean, I think they represent so much of what sort of drew me into art nude photography in the first place. And I was very, very lucky in that I worked with some extremely good models very early on after picking up the camera, which certainly inspired me. And they were, great to work with, as well as being very professional and always amazing me in what they could pull off in front of a camera. So yeah, and interesting, all the images I've sort of submitted today, they're all black and white. I mean, some of them work very well in color, to be fair, especially the ones with the drapes, because the drapes are red. But I'm always drawn to black and white. For me, dynamic fine art nudes like this, and like we'll talk about, it's so much about the lighting being very critical. And I think black and white is always going to look more stunning and more dramatic in this sort of field. But it doesn't mean colour doesn't work. It most certainly does. That's just my personal preference.
Brilliant. Okay, so let's get back to the beginning. When did the world of photography start for you, and kind of what inspired you to specialise in fine art nudes?
Well, it really started in 2015, and it was very much triggered by sort of beginning to think about reducing from full-time to part-time work. And if that was the case, looking for some other challenge, something I'd not done before. My work career had been very much down a scientific, analytical background, where words were very much my sort of craft. But I guess I'd always been frustrated that, if I had a creative side, it was quite difficult to draw it out in that sort of professional field. I did, first of all, I picked up some pens and pencils, because my wife is she's actually a painter, landscape painter, and I did try that. But I mean, to say I was hopeless is just a bit of an understatement. I was completely terrible. And somebody once said to me, well, that can't be the case. And they, I did a drawing in front of them, and they said, yeah, it's absolutely the case. Walk away from this. So I did. But luckily, I had I don't know quite why I picked up a camera, but I think I saw a sort of session advertised at one of the studios. I think it was Paul's studio west of London. And I didn't even have the right camera for it, but I went along and sort of gave it a go. And I can tell you, the moment it really captured my imagination was when I turned the viewfinder on the back of the camera to black and white, and suddenly the images really began to stand out, and it just drew me in. I mean, I couldn't believe that light could work so well, and especially on a woman's body, which shows the sort of highlights and the shadows and the curves and lines so dramatically well, if the lighting is good. And obviously in those early days, I had help with the lighting. I went to a couple of studios to really try and learn how to get the lighting right. And that's kind of really what drew me in. But it was this, I think, a need really to try and find that creative side that was very much subdued by the scientific, analytical, and creative side, and the much more analytical side. And I guess once I started using the camera, I was really beginning to look for some ways to get that expressed artistically.
Yeah. A couple more questions before we start on the images.
Yeah.
How do you define fine art in the context of nude photography? Because this word fine art, or words fine art, is bandied around all over the place, isn't it? But how do you define it?
I mean, I define it, I suppose, really adding the word fine in there it's almost like adding in the word quality. You know, you're trying very hard to achieve something. It's not a snapshot. It's not a, you know, it's not a just something snapped off very quickly. You set out with a deliberate purpose, trying to capture an image which draws viewers in because it's got something. It's got something, you know, of quality about it, something which is intriguing, something which kind of makes the viewer look at it and look at it for more than just a brief fleeting moment. I think that's the thing I struggle with so much sort of the digital cyber world. You know, images are flashed up. We're completely overloaded with them, saturated, and they're looked at for such brief periods of time. And I guess that to me is what is represented there in fine, as apart to dropping it out completely, and just putting dynamic art nudes, which wouldn't to me imply that you're making some considerable effort with this, both you and the model, of course, who, you know, is making. I mean, the models I've worked with, you know, they are so dedicated and so hardworking. I've been quite staggered. I mean, I've left exhausted after some of these sessions.
I'm never quite sure whether we need the words fine art in front of the word nudes to kind of almost make sure that people realize that this is about the artistic statement rather than the pornographic kind of element, you know, and the celebration of the human body and everything else within things. Because when we look at a drawing, funny enough, I was an artist 20 years ago when I was a young man. My wife bought me a very special sketch by one of the artists that I really, really love. And we couldn't afford his paintings. They're that expensive, but we could afford a sketch. And anyway, I had it reframed because we damaged the frame, and he's still alive. And I basically wrote to him and asked if there was any chance that he could give the provenance back to the sketch, as it were. So I had to take it to him, and basically had a tour of the studio and everything else with it and things. But when you see an artist draw and paint, you don't need to use the words fine art.
No.
But it seems that as photographers, we're almost trying to force the art world to accept that this is to be looked at as an art. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's brutally correct. Actually, I mean, I don't think we need. You know, we could easily drop those two words out, but I think it is an attempt to show that this is something more than, you know, so much of what is bandied about, which is not very professionally worked and is really very fleeting in its level of interest. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Mark. I think that's you've kind of wrapped it up in a nutshell, really.
Well, no, it's just a personal thing, isn't it? You know, I think, you know, when we have to put words, and you said about, you know, you've enjoyed words in your career, that when you kind of get to have this discussion with talented photographers, it's an easy way for us to kind of discuss what some people want to hide away from. Yeah, anyway, the nude, powerful subject for artistic exploration. Why is it so powerful? And I'll move on to the image when we get here, because this is a powerful image of two naked people, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And it is a very powerful image. Forget they're naked, but the artistic exploration. But why do you believe that nudes are a powerful subject for you?
I think it's just that when you look at the lines and the curves, the shadows and highlights, that the image really comes alive to me. And this is why I think these sorts of images work so well in black and white. In color, I don't think this would pop quite so much. And I mean, this one is particularly. I mean, I couldn't believe that these two models produced this work. They I think only ever worked together once before this session, and not really on this dynamic fine art nudes type of genre. And they really just both went off and explored what they could do. And I sat really just being awestruck by what they could do.
Yeah.
And I just think I mean, the human body is intriguing. I mean, there'd be something very wrong, surely, if the body did not um, create that interest within us. After all, we are human. And I think that for me, there's less interest in photographing people with clothes, because you're then masking persona, you're creating fashion, you're putting divisions up between the different quality of clothing and affordability of clothing. Same with jewelry. I think there's nothing purer than that's exactly how we came into the world, is naked in nude, and I think it's the most dramatic way of photographing people. It's incredibly honest. There's nothing, there's no sort of hidden persona in it. I mean, I think that is probably less so with these dynamic fine art nudes, because this is as much about the poses that are being struck, the shapes that they're creating, the harmony between the models when it's a duo session. But I think that's generally how I feel.
I asked you before we went live whether you wanted them in a specific order, and you said no, as you want them, and I chose this one first specifically. Why? Because the lighting I kind of love, because of its almost, I'm going to use the word flatness, but I don't mean it's flat, because there's so much muscle definition going on. But when you look at the smoothness of the skin tones overall, when I first looked at this image, it almost looked like there was a third person.
Yeah,
And the third person was missing, except for their legs. And it really intrigued me, even though I know it's two. What's your thoughts? Did you realize it looked like a third person when you took the photograph, or was it in the printing?
No, it was in the printing. I mean, I have to say, these two models, it's Ayla Rose and Anna Rose, they worked so quickly together and they had so much fun. They were really buzzing, and I very much struggled to keep up with them. I mean, I think this was only the second session ever with my camera at the time, the
Wow.
Canon Mark III. I had not yet worked out how to use its rather clever and intricate focus system where it follows movement. And I felt I was always, if not a full step, half a step behind the two models for the entire shoot. And I finished completely exhausted, and all I'd done was lie around on the floor, pressing the trigger. But my goodness me, it was so difficult to keep up with them. And no, I mean, when I look at this image, I'm looking for the third person, because you really believe she must be there, but of course she isn't. But no, I didn't see it at the time. So much of it was, as I say, literally struggling to keep up with the incredible tempo these two models kept up through.
When you're choosing your models for this kind of shoot, would you be looking for more of an artistic model as far as flexibility, dance, or kind of gymnastic kind of element?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things I learned very quickly. On sites like Purpleport, you can see a very good portfolio of a good range of models, who are either full-time or part-time or hobbyist models. So you can really do your research. And I was always, I am always looking for very athletic, if they've got a dance background, particular ballet background. It really helps to achieve these quite dramatic images, and because you want to produce something that stands out. You want to produce something that people aren't going to walk past in a gallery without even turning their heads.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is in the model that you choose for exactly what you want to create. And as I say, sites like Purpleport in the UK, certainly, they really help us do that.
talk us through the setup with this lighting wise, especially as it was in your kind of beginning, as it were.
Yeah. Well,
Where's your kind of lighting? What kind of lighting? What kind of diffusion, etc.? What are you using?
well, I'm always going to for this sort of thing. I'm always going to try to go for a long strip softbox, tall but narrow, always gridded, and I mean, you can light in so many different ways, but I do tend to go rather like sandwich lighting. I suspect this isn't full sandwich looking at it, but it must be fairly close. You know, where you have lights at basically 90 degrees, they're opposite each other, and they're at 90 degrees more or less to the models. But equally, I love putting the lighting slightly behind the models and aiming it, or just tilting it slightly forward. But I think the really critical thing is putting the grids on the softbox so that you don't spill light everywhere. You know, I've sort of referred a couple of times to what I find really intriguing with this type of image are the very close definition of shadow and highlight, and you have to control the light very tightly, and that putting a grid on the front of a softbox makes that task so much easier. And of course, the other thing is, you know, sometimes it's just the movement of a few centimeters that makes such a big difference. Yeah. Which is why I think it's always worth playing with lighting. You know, set it up, see if you like it, and then move it until you realize you don't like it as much. And then you go back to the really sweet spot that you found. But I can't really emphasize enough, for these types of images, the lighting is absolutely critical. You know, if you don't get the lighting right, however hard the models work or the rest of the photography session goes, you know, you're going to come away slightly disappointed. I mean, I have to say, most of my early work, I look back on it and I can see flaws in the lighting now. I never saw them at the time, of course, and I mean, it doesn't necessarily detract from the image, but you know, I think you can always look back and improve, which I guess I didn't have time in this shoot, but this is the whole thing about just moving the lighting a little bit until you're really sure it's exactly in the right place.
Good, lovely image. That fantastic.
Thank you.
Oh, next image. So the same models, I gather.
Yeah, same models, and I mean, obviously it's quite a difficult shoot when you have a dark-skinned and a pale-skinned model, because it really makes the lighting more difficult. But I think it makes the photograph in this case, or the in this set, even more dramatic and interesting. And I just couldn't believe what the models were doing. I mean, I didn't even see what I saw. Ayla, who's the model on the right-hand side of the screen as we look at it, the pale skin model. I saw her going into her sort of very tall arch, but then Anna Rose on the left, she sort of went into a bit of a handstand and shuffled backwards until she curved right back, just about to touch Ayla, at which point you see this happening and you just know that has to be a belting good image, unless you really mess it up, you know, with desperate poor lighting or you've got movement on the camera shake or something. That's one, you know, it's kind of rare sometimes to see something very magical immediately in front of your eyes, but that was definitely the case here. I think my only regret really was the studio was quite a small studio, and if I'd realised what was going to happen, I would have booked a different studio with more space, because these models were very agile, and for me, I had to crop in the end too tight. Some of the images for me, they're a little bit too tightly cropped, but I just couldn't avoid that without hitting the lights or bringing the lights into the frame or getting other parts of the studio. So, you know, I'm always I suppose I'm always critical, but I actually really love that image. It's one of my absolute favourites.
In some ways, though, if you'd had a bigger studio booked, it might have not got you the images, because things could have been spread out more. And you would have just actually not been able to control it and things really. So, you know, you wouldn't have got this image really any differently with a bigger studio, would you? In fact, you might have missed this image because
Yeah.
they'd be concentrating on filling the space, the bigger space kind of thing with it.
Yeah. Good point, Mark.
So talk to me about the lens. You mentioned that this was kind of one of the first shoots with your Mark III.
Yeah.
What kind of lens setup did you shoot then, and what kind of lens setup would you use now if you're doing the same thing?
Well, I think in the early days, I was using. I really really loved the 70 to 200 Canon. It was an f4. I would have loved an f2.8, but that's a heck of a lot more money and a lot more weight. And wherever I possibly could, and I think I probably used it. I must have used it in the shoot because I remember shuffling backwards till I was nearly out the door of the studio. I mean, I pushed myself back away further back than the studio space, right back into the entrance hallway, and I think my feet were against the door, just so that I could use that lens because I love it so much. But I think more recently, and certainly outdoor, I'm using my 24 to 105 lens a great deal more because it's so versatile so quickly. And I guess actually, if I'd known how this shoot was going to turn out, that may have been a better lens to use. But yeah, and I tend to have my favourite lenses, which I tend to stick by. And again, quality on the lens, I think, is certainly a good spend if you can. If you can afford a good lens, it's definitely worth it.
We change our bodies, we don't change the glass much unless we've had to buy
Yeah,
budget lenses to begin with, isn't it? So
exactly.
what kind of aperture do you use then and use now, kind of thing?
I think for the dynamic art nudes, I was using either 8 or 11. 8, I found is a good. It's 8 is very good because it's incredibly sharp, because
Yep.
it's very close to almost all lenses, very very sweet spot. But 11, when I felt I needed more in focus, when there was more movement in the frame, perhaps, then I would be shooting at 11. And I'm sure all of these images are shot either at 8 or 11. It was those. That's my go-to focal lens. Focal.
Finally,
Point.
on this image, this is quite brave for a photographer who was just getting going to book two models for the same shoot. And I'd usually be asking the question about how did you build the trust and the comfort with your subject. But of course, you could almost be intimidated because they're so professional, they're so agile, they're so dynamic. As a kind of a photographer just beginning to learn their way in fine art, it could almost be tossed around the other way, couldn't it? It could almost making you feel a little bit uncomfortable and so on with it. But it was still a brave decision to book the two. What's the idea, or what was the idea about booking the two models straight away?
I had worked with each of them solo before, and I knew both were outstanding models. And I knew that we would be able to create something rather special. But of course, I hadn't appreciated just how difficult, shooting two models, even in static positions, is 4 times as difficult as shooting one. And when you add movement and dynamism into the shoot, it does make it even more difficult. Which is why I think there are very, very, very few shoots I've finished as exhausted as this one. Even though I felt like I had just been lying around on the floor. It was, I struggled to keep up, but I wasn't intimidated, to be perfectly honest. I absolutely loved what the models could do. This for me was exactly why I picked a camera up. And it, I guess what I look back on it now, these opportunities actually are really rare unless you make them happen somehow. I thought Anna Rays and Ayla Rays would work together all the time. They actually work together very few times. Both are largely retired now. And it's like, my goodness me, what a rare opportunity that proved to be. And
Beautiful.
thank goodness.
Yeah, thank God you had a good idea.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, the first of our nudes wrapped.
Yeah.
What's the story behind this image?
This is M. Teresa, another model, professional model, and I think she's incredibly aerially dynamic, and introducing that sort of third element of getting the model off the floor. Obviously, not everybody can do that, and I certainly wouldn't want to be working with with many models when they're inverted upside down over a concrete floor like this. But I mean, I don't know if she was circus trained at some point, but she's incredibly athletic and very comfortable working off the ground, be that on a hoop, on a swing, or in this case, just using a floor to ceiling drape, which I just asked. I just said to her, well, what can you do with a drape? Expecting her to do the sort of static poses. And incredibly, she sort of managed to hook herself up on this. And the only real problem we had was we had to stop this. When she was in this position, there was constant movement of spinning. Her body was spinning round. So I had to get the studio and ask him to come back, and we held on, or he held on, and then withdrew at the very last moment just to make sure it was a static shot, because obviously, it's the inverted cross of this that makes it so dramatic.
And what do you think about, are you worried about what people might think with this to do with the inverted cross and the nude in one image?
No, not really. I think, it's not an explicit nude. It's not provocative. I don't feel it's provocative or particularly controversial. I think it's a beautiful shape. The lighting, luckily enough, shows, highlights the body beautifully, and I think it's a testament to her skill as a very, very, athletic model to be able to do this sort of thing. All these images I love, but I love this one too because, I'd not really worked before with a model who was going to invert herself upside down over a concrete floor like that, and I wouldn't have asked her to do it either. But luckily, as I say, I think she's very skilled in this area and was just as good above the ground as on it in terms of posing.
How much post-processing do you typically do on an image? And suppose we could talk retrospectively as well. How much work would you have done on this at the time, and how much work would you do on it if you shot the same thing again?
Not that much actually, because if the lighting is right with these dynamic fine art, you're not going to have much to do. It's not like this isn't a glamour or a beauty shot. There's not a lot of skin retouch, and there's not a lot of dudging and burning beyond what was captured, in the camera through the lighting. So I think this sort of image, they tend to be quite light on editing compared to so many other genres of nude photography. I think the work tends to be up front. The most important thing is selecting the right model, and of course getting lighting right and working out. You want to try and produce something that's different. You don't really want. Well, I didn't want to work with just producing the same poses that these models had produced for other photographers. I really wanted them. I really wanted to create something with them, something that was different and was new. And I think, with these images, we tended to do that.
And this is a rental studio, yes? So were you specifically looking for something there you could do aerial work with?
Yes, I'd worked. This is the Cottage Studio, or Photo 39, I think, on Purpleport. It's Brian Kimber's place, and I love it because it's very high ceilinged. It's actually a big studio, very well equipped. But I knew he had the floor to ceiling drapes. He's got hoops. He's got rings. So he's got that added element, the dimension that you can work with models off the floor, in actually a very safe environment. I by this stage I was definitely choosing studios, appropriate for what I really wanted to be shooting.
And was there a project or a theme in mind when you were setting out to do the drape nudes, or was it just something a part of a shoot?
No, just part of the shoot. They were only parts of shoots that I did with various models in a couple of studios where I just felt it's unusual really for me in the sense that I tend not to use props, and the drape is of course a prop, but then you couldn't do this sort of thing without it. So I sort of justify using props when I feel I really, they provide an opportunity you're not going to get any other way. Same with a hoop or a swing. And I've also used other elements in studios as well, but I tend not to like putting in distractions. I mean, I have shot models against pillars and things, but actually in the end I found the pillars quite distracting. I like it to be as clean as possible, with the least amount of distraction going on.
Are there any particular challenges with lighting this kind of shot?
Yeah, the biggest challenge was stopping M's body from spinning, because unfortunately when you're sort of hanging in that position, it wasn't static, and it definitely needed to be. I mean, I did try shooting faster to capture, but the other thing is it had to be absolutely straight on. The image didn't work so well if there was even a small amount of twist. One arm's longer than the other, and she's not looking straight back. It's just not as striking. So that was the real challenge. As for the lighting, once we had the lighting set up, I was really quite comfortable with it. I didn't have to move the lighting much for this, and obviously it was a very narrow space to work in, because she was suspended in that one dimension, and apart from the spinning, which I eventually got that stopped by asking the studio owner to just hold on to her hand until the very last moment. It was pretty straightforward.
And our next image, so the nude on the box.
Yeah, that's Rebecca Tunn, another very good professional model. And I put this one in because I guess I wanted to show this can be very dramatic without the pose itself being, it's not hanging upside down from the ceiling or curved right over. And I think this one to me shows how lines and curves work so well. You can see the sort of the arms form such a lovely shape with the legs, and then you've got the sort of curves of the hips, and I just think for me it's, and of course you've got the box which adds further lines into the image. I guess my only comment on this one was I would have liked that cropped out a lot bit bigger. I'm not quite sure why that's cropped in that tight, because I did have room in the studio. Probably wanted me to look at that one, but it's the lines here, the lighting and the lines, and the fact that Rebecca has struck those lines so well. I also like the fact she's holding her hair. That's another line, it closes the box with her arm.
And as it almost looks like the Isle of Man kind of the arms doing things, really. Not to bring in another island for you. Lighting wise, are you keeping to the kind of the similar positions, similar kind of strip boxes and things?
Yeah, I suspect with this one I probably had the light behind Rebecca slightly in front of her, and the light on her on the behind her is probably also pushed a little bit further back, just so that it's not a complete. Probably if it was complete sandwich lighting, we wouldn't see quite so much lighting on the limbs. And as I say, I think for this image, it's the limbs that make this so dynamic, and they need to be lit.
Very good. Our next image, we're back to the drapes.
Yeah, again, another really good model. That's Free Spirit. She's very, very creative. And I mean, I could have put in so many different images we shot with drapes, but I just kind of like that one because she's got such a lovely curve, wonderful straight lines of her legs and arm, but the curvature of her back to me makes this one, and having the drapes in, I think does add something. And that was another good example. I could have put some with Free Spirit inverted. She did some lovely poses in the air, but in the end, because I had one of M. Teresa, I chose this one, which was more of a static pose. But similar sort of deal. Not shot as part of the series. Just the drapes are there. I tend to like to use them whenever I go to the studio, because just like this, you might get something a little bit different. This not a pose I asked Free Spirit to produce. It's one she created herself. In fact, I had to run one of the models I'd been working with in the morning back to the station, and I left Free Spirit in the studio. When I came back, she was inverted on the drapes in some quite dramatic poses. So, I think often these models, they just come up with such creative ideas. They're almost challenges to them, to find new ways of producing a striking image. And but I think that is all about selecting your model. Select a model who is going to work hard and be creative and look for something that's just a little bit different, not keep producing the same poses for each photographer.
It feels like it's almost a photograph taken for a sculptor to kind of go off and cast a bronze. Do you understand what I mean by that? Using the drapes, the drape hitting the floor is almost where it stands, and then obviously as it kind of goes up is where she's levitated off the floor itself and things with it. Do you think this kind of image helps an evolving perception, do you think, of how the nude art is kind of looked at in society? I know it's kind of a big discussion. We could spend all day on it probably. What's your kind of gut instinct?
No, I'd like to think so. I mean, certainly, you're right. If you look back over, a couple of centuries of nude art, you're going to see these sorts of images in sculpture and also in painting and in line drawing, etc. And I think the camera now is also able to do it. I think the camera adds something that's not there with the others, and vice versa, which is, I actually like, a range of artistic mediums. Not that I'm good at any of them, other than perhaps okay at photography, but the rest I just appreciate, looking at them. And I think, as a photographer, for example, and you're visiting art galleries and museums, is a fantastic thing to do, because, we're looking then at, often artists from, previous decades or even centuries, and we're looking at poses they've painted, and some of them get echoed in the work that we produce as photographers today.
Do you think walking into a gallery with this kind of image you've got more chance to have an exhibition than perhaps the previous image with the nude on the box?
I'm not sure, to be honest, Mark. I mean, I obviously I'd be delighted to exhibit both of these images, and certainly if I was doing a gallery exhibition, I would include a range of dynamic nudes to show the breadth of what's possible, rather than limiting it to one particular kind of narrow subgenre within the genre itself. I think I would.
Okay. Next image, similar theme.
This is Elle Beth. Worked with Elle a number of times. I would put Elle in she's an absolutely classic fine art nude model. She's just very curvaceous, produces the most wonderful lines, and is really, really good at getting her body into poses which just draw you in by the shape alone. She's producing the shape, and then I think our job as photographers to craft the light around the shape to bring out the best highlights of that shape. And working with Elle has always been a pleasure. I've done it several times, both for these sorts of shoots and also outdoors in nature. She's a great model to work with. And again, it's another drape shot, probably the last one I suspect, but just showing the variety of things you can do, with just one prop, if you find that it adds to the image. A lot of the classic art nudes, which aren't so dynamic with Elle, I wouldn't have anything in. I would just leave it without any distraction other than the tremendous shapes that she produces with her body.
How was the drape nude, these kind of images, evolved? So from the first time that you did it to kind of as you're kind of playing around with it more and more, I know you're shooting mainly on location now, but
Yeah.
as you were shooting these images, did you find because you had more experience of the drape that you were doing different things, or was it pretty much left to the model?
No, it's a combination. I mean, I'm always very happy to see what the model can produce, and always I will do that first before introducing my ideas, because very often they're much better. They know what their abilities are, they know what they can do, they know what will work with their, the poses that they are particularly good at. So I'll always ask them to pose first, but then not so much when I started, because I wasn't really aware of all the different possibilities. But as I've sort of worked several times with drapes like this, then you know that there's some areas you really shouldn't miss out. If you've got an aerial model, then I'd always look to do something off the ground as well as on the ground, and more. I suppose I got more complex as opposed to the more simple shots with drapes. But you can do a lot with the drape themselves too. I mean, the images I've chosen, they all tend to be fairly simple with the drapes, but you can use the drape a lot more. But I guess for that, it's probably moving a little bit away from the dynamic, because you're beginning to wrap the drape much more around the body, and I think then color is going to come into its own, because the drape is scarlet red. It's dramatic in itself against a dark background and a pale model. So I think I would sort of wander off into color territory there. But I like to just test ideas, Mark. They don't all work. I mean, sometimes I've wasted hours producing stuff and just trying it, and then finally deciding, well, actually, I'm not really sure I like any of that stuff, and that's the end of it. But you don't know unless you try.
Good. Before we move on to the next image, well, we're on the next image, but before we talk about it, have you faced any criticism or challenges due to the nature of the dynamic nude, whether it's friends, family, socially, as such, really?
Yeah, I mean, I was a bit sort of cautious to start with. I mean, I did a lot of my work anonymously under Amazilia without necessarily putting my name to it. Primarily because I wasn't really sure how family would react, which was all a bit daft, because in the end, I actually held some exhibitions. Family and friends came. All the feedback was extremely positive, and I was expecting a lot more difficulty. But then I'm not quite sure. I think it is a very common problem photographers, and probably models too, will encounter. There is a tremendous amount of prejudice. I mean, it's hard for me to see in a way, because I cannot see anything wrong with this sort of image. I mean, just what's the problem? If you're going to flash up an image of violence to me, I'm going to be far more concerned and offended by gratuitous violence than I am this sort of thing. But I know that's not necessarily reflective of society as a whole. But then I think a lot of that is just driven by I don't know. It's just driven by what people believe are societal norms. I mean, norms change all the time. They have done over centuries. You take a country like France. It's gone from periods of being very, very liberal in its approach to nudes in art to very restrictive, and then back to more liberal. And I find the whole thing a bit puzzling. I think there are far more serious things for people to worry about, primarily around violence and cruelty than around beauty and natural nudity. But that's just my view. No doubt.
Well, you know what? That's the great thing about these discussions, though, isn't it? Really, it's our view. We're not really, you're a man of good taste. I believe I'm a man of good taste. And at the end of the day, we have to be our own editors in everything we do in life.
Yeah.
I know it's, very frustrating for so many fine art photographers that they can't really show their work to the world on social platforms, because of restrictions and so on with it, without kind of going behind closed doors. And as soon as you go behind the closed door or the curtain or whatever it is, then all of a sudden it becomes suspicious and dirty and all
Yeah.
that kind of thing. When you look at an image like this, and there is no way you could say that this is offensive in any way except for a naked body.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
not sexual, is it?
No.
You're not trying to make this explicit. You're not trying to force a view onto anybody. Like I've said to many fine art photographers, especially in the nude world, when I see this image, I think of a sculpture, and we could
Yeah.
walk into a gallery and we could go, "Oh my God, that is amazing."
Yeah.
And it is frustrating for the likes of you, I'm sure, that you do have these constraints and so on.
Yeah, I mean, it is, but then I guess I sort of reached the point in my life where it was, it wasn't. I guess I'm less concerned about, I really care about, people who really matter to me and whose opinions I really value. Of course, that means a lot to me, but I mean, I find so much. There's so much criticism about so many things that and so much of it is just completely unjust. I'm not quite sure what the attraction of being critical all the time is. I'd much more praise people. I'd much personally prefer to, praise people and encourage people who are trying to do things, than just be critical and put them down because they're trying to do something, even if it's something I'm not interested in or I disagree with. Provided it's not breaking laws, then I don't really see why they don't get on with it. Not,
Right, let's talk about this image before we forget, because we've talked a lot. Talk to us about the nude on the block.
Yeah, that's Elbeth again. Again, I think this does show her sort of real strengths of being a classic fine art posing. She's just so good at it. I mean, this one was shot in a general studio session where we shot, I suppose, a number of different areas using different apparatus in the studio, but a simple box just works so well. But I do think it's completely, and maybe that's why I like dynamic these sorts of images. They're rather simple in a way, aren't they? There's something compelling about them, but there isn't much in this. There is the shape and the beauty of the shape, and there's the lighting, but there's no complex background. There's just not, it's not an overcrowded image, and I think none of these images are. They're all rather simplistic in a way, rather simple, but albeit beautiful.
You've obviously nailed your processing. By the way, this is really sad, but this is the last image, and we're going to leave it on screen a lot, okay? Because I love it. Black and white. Talk to me about your post-processing for your black and white, both then and now, as it were. What kind of techniques are you doing during the exposure, the kind of then in the post-production element?
By far the most important thing, I mean, assuming you've got the lighting right, so we tick that box, the most important thing by far is obviously shooting in RAW and capturing as much of the detail as you possibly can at the time of shooting. So, if you're looking at histogram on your camera, you've got a full range of pixels, and you're not blowing out the highlights, which is incredibly easy to do in this sort of thing. Or just as bad, you're losing detail right down in the shadows, because with these black and white images, the shadows are really, really important. So you can't afford to lose detail there. And provided at the time of the shoot, you're capturing that full range of tones, then you can do anything you like, in post production with it afterwards. And in actual fact, as I mentioned a little earlier, you probably will have to do incredibly little, because if you've got that full range, you might then just want to do some adjusting, to potentially bring your highlights down a little bit, possibly, or bring your shadows up or down or whatever, depending on what the exact nature of the image. But as long as you've got that, you can do this, and you can always do it. As long as you don't lose your raw file, your raw image, you can go back and edit and produce images in completely different ways, which I have done. It's quite an interesting exercise. You end up with two images that look just so different sometimes. So I think shoot it as well as you can in the camera to start with is going to make your life so much easier. And it gives you a full range of potential for later on. If I do have to edit a lot in black and white, it's generally around the dodging and burning. But also, one shouldn't really forget that you can play with the colours in black and white, adjust the colour, the RGBs, just to get the exact sort of tones that you really think are best in the image, and they will vary from image to image. There's no, I think that's a problem with people who are only ever converting, using the simple monotone preset. It's only going to do it, in a very uniform way. Whereas, if you do it by yourself playing with the RGBs, then you can, the red screens and blues, you can bring out some different toning, which may look even better. Again, it's well worth playing with. It's trial and error, isn't it? It's a bit of experimenting, and there is no right or wrong. I mean, as you've said before, Mark, this is all about opinion, isn't it? It's taste. It's what we like as individuals. And I find what I like as an individual, even in a relatively simple black and white image, can be rather different, in terms of the tones that are produced at the end. I've printed some of my work rather dark, and then I've printed it rather bright, and they both work actually, but they are very different, and it's just personal preference.
The choice of models, I know you'd worked with each one of these girls beforehand, and we've kind of talked about the dancer and the gymnast and everything else. I think this is an image that pretty much personifies what we're on about, isn't it? As far as their own attention to details. You don't have to get them to think about their hand positions or finger positions. They are naturally wanting perfection themselves, isn't it?
They are. I mean, I think I would just to clarify with this too, that it wasn't actually me that put these two models together in the first place. I think it was Richard Maxwell, very, very good photographer on Purple Port. And he put them together in the first place, which was absolutely inspired of him, because not only did he spot that their physiques are very similar, which makes them interesting in their own right, but different coloured skin, and they could match each other with athletic ability. I mean, it was absolutely inspired, and I can't believe that it happened as so rarely. And it's incredibly difficult, to pair models up sometimes. Their diaries just don't work. So yeah, but I mean, as you say, the attention they both have to detail, and the work rate they've got pressing for, and in this particular shoot, they really not even though the models have been put together, some photographers shot completely different things, because obviously they're interested in different aspects of, or different genres. So they were shooting some portraiture or some fashion, but I couldn't believe why everybody had not shot this dynamic nude, because they're both excel at it so well, and put them both together. And I assumed that they had worked like this many times before, but they hadn't. So they were experimenting. They were really enjoying working, with and to each other. It really was a fabulous shoot.
It's interesting, this image. There's almost no black within the image. Is that a purpose thing that you've done? Have you held black?
No, it's not. It wasn't done by design. I think it's just because there are some I mean, it's inevitable with the image given the positioning of the hands. But if I've got some shadows which I don't particularly like going down Ayla's back on the left hand side.
Yeah.
So I didn't, I just didn't want to darken the image too much to make, I've drawn attention to that, but it's not something I want people to really notice in the image. There are other things in that image I want them to see, not particularly that shadow down Ayla's, diagonally down Ayla's body, which is inevitable given the arm positions.
Are there any particular artists or photographers you've had influence through your work over the past decade?
Oh yeah, I mean, I look widely at other photographers' work, and I mean there have been a number, mostly on Purple Port because it's it's where I've gone to, and there have been a number. I mean, I remember I was certainly with this sort of work, I was really impressed with. I think he's down as elegantly erotic on Purple Port now, but I always called him the Dark Master because to me, he produces nude work, very dark, incredibly well. I mean, he really has mastered to me that sort of spectrum of the tones. But I also, I've liked. There's another photographer, Wave Power. I really like his work. Done some superb work. Thomas Holm, of course, has got a lot of work on Purple Port and beyond. And I suppose there's probably a good 8 or 10. Kestrel in Wales is another photographer whose work I found very inspiring. But I think it's a very helpful thing to do to look at other photographers' work, not because you want to copy it. I mean, I most definitely did not want to copy anybody's work. But I wanted to be inspired by it and to realize what was possible. And I think it's great reviewing other good photographers or good models. It's great to see them working and to see what they produce. And I do find it encourages me and inspires me.
So I know you've been working a lot more with Nude on location now. Has just kind of picking out those images and chatting about them inspired you to go back in the studio at all?
Yeah, it has really. Yeah, definitely. Because it's a while now. I really, as you say, like working outside. It's to me the most inspiring place to work. I can always find creative things to shoot with models outside in nature. But when I chose those images and we've just been talking about it. Gosh, I wish I'd shot some more now.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at the one specifically with the black background, the solid black background, and pretty much you could shoot that in a house, couldn't you? I know you'd be limited with the height, perhaps, but if you invested into some kind of just really dark cloth, we used to buy calico and actually get it all stitched together. And it used to be my commercial backgrounds because it was only available in certain widths. And we could buy it by any length we wanted, and we were lucky we had a seamstress next door to our studio in the 80s. And this little old woman, we used to go in with these 3 huge pieces of calico, which is like a buff material, and she used to stitch the whole things together, and that was our get out of jail free in any commercial shoot we had. It was always in the car or always in the van in case we needed a massive backdrop, because it was the only thing that you could hide pretty much machinery with. But doing the same thing, just going down to a cloth shop, I'm not sure what they're called nowadays, and getting it stitched together and everything else could actually create pretty much any photographer. If they're faced with the costs of studio hire and they want to kind of start it off, they'll probably not have to look too far to find somebody who's willing to photograph nude. In the same way, is one of the first nudes I ever did was a local model who I met through having to do life drawing.
Yeah.
And that was sorry.
No, I think that's a really good way of doing it. I mean, certainly I've worked with a few local models now, and I think what I liked about that too was, well, certainly they weren't all professional models either, and so I had to learn a little bit more about posing as well, which was valuable. It certainly, I think, helped me to work out poses better and work out quite what I was trying to achieve in some of the images. And I take your point. I mean, I have definitely used black backgrounds, in a home studio very effectively. I think it's a very easy thing to do, very cheap, and but of course, I suppose I've also accumulated a bit of lighting, which certainly does help. I mean, I mentioned before, for this sort of thing, you definitely want to have some soft boxes and gridded soft boxes, with the egg crates on the front, to really focus and direct the light, and also some strong lighting. Probably, flashes aren't really, sorry, battery powered flash guns aren't quite as good as proper studio strobes, because you tend to shoot quite fast and can go through a lot of images, and not many flashes would keep up with that.
I think one of the things, going back to the fine art models, finding a local one who you can afford.
Yeah.
Because often it can be quite expensive if you're looking for a certain kind of body and a certain kind of person. But going down to the local art group and finding their connections for art models, you will find them, and they're quite realistic to kind of book for a few hours. And they're used to working with artists and keeping positions and poses for very long periods of time. But they're also very aware of their body, and it's kind of not a bad place if somebody's just getting going. It's kind of, and you have no budget, shoot your passion. I've always been a believer of that. If you really want to do something, find a way to do it. You don't have to kind of have that most amazing model in the beginning. Yes, it helps. You'll get better images straight away. But even the likes of like a fine art model that they'll be just for kind of drawing and sketching and so on with it, they're local to you, and they will have 2 or 3 kind of pretty much guarantee. And I would say as well, for anybody who's just getting going with the nude, just don't focus in on the female nude. In fact, even though that's everything we've done today, the male nude and the male nude dancer can be absolutely amazing. To kind of shoot and things, really. But anyway, Paul, thank you so much. If anybody wants any information about Paul, see more of his work, then head across to Amazilia Photography on Purple Port, which you'll kind of find anywhere, no matter what. And if you want to see more of Paul's work, then you can head over to his website, which is amazilia.photography, where you can find more of his work, information, latest news, etc. Yeah, Paul, I love you. Honestly, it's been great to actually view so much more of your work, because I know we kind of looked at all the fine art nudes on nature, or natural nudes in nature we did the last time. It's been great to actually see kind of almost the beginnings of
Yes, it sort of feels that way, really. But thank you. I've really enjoyed.
I hope you're going to jump back in the studio very soon, because you've shot some amazing images there.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks for inviting me back. It's been a real pleasure again to have a chat.
I'm bringing you back again. You know that, no matter what. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Mark.
Good luck. Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Bye.